Some boundaries aren't broken with noise, they crumble in silence. I never imagined it could happen in my own home, with someone I trusted, someone I should have never looked at that way. This is my story, the one no one knows. When my son-in-law crossed a boundary, everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and loneliness changed forever. I never thought my story would be one I'd have to tell from the shadows. But sometimes, silence becomes too heavy to carry alone. I'm a woman in my early 50s, married for almost 30 years. My husband, David, is a good man, steady, predictable, the kind of man who keeps the house running but rarely keeps the heart warm. Our daughter, Lily, got married 3 years ago to a young man named Ryan. He was charming, attentive, and polite, everything a mother would hope for in the man marrying her daughter. When Lily told us she'd be going abroad for a short medical course, I offered our home to Ryan so he wouldn't be lonely. It seemed harmless at the time, a simple gesture of kindness from a mother to her son-in-law. But that decision became the quiet beginning of a storm I never saw coming. The first few days were ordinary. We shared small talks over dinner, the kind of casual conversation people have when they're filling silence. Ryan always asked if I needed help, always insisted on clearing the table or washing the dishes. I brushed it off as politeness, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't notice the way his eyes lingered on me sometimes, curious, questioning, almost hesitant. I convinced myself it was my imagination. David left for a business trip the following week, leaving just Ryan and me in the house. That's when the air started to feel different, heavier somehow. I began to notice things. How Ryan's laughter filled the rooms, how his cologne lingered faintly in the hallway, how easily we slipped into conversations that were far too personal. He told me about his fears, about not being good enough for Lily, about feeling trapped between being a husband and still figuring out who he really was. I found myself relating to that uncertainty more than I should have. One evening, after dinner, we sat outside on the porch. The night was still, the sky painted with quiet stars. He brought out a bottle of wine, saying Lily had bought it for us months ago but never opened it. I hesitated, then agreed to one glass. One glass became 2, then 3, and soon we were talking about things I hadn't spoken about in years, my fading marriage, my lost sense of womanhood, the ache of being seen but not truly felt. When I laughed, he watched me the way a man watches something he wants but knows he shouldn't touch. The air between us pulsed with something unsaid. My heart raced, not from fear but from being reminded that I was still alive, still capable of being desired. I remember that moment vividly, the way his hand brushed mine as he reached for the bottle, how I didn't pull away fast enough. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't innocent either. It was the kind of accidental touch that holds a question in it, the kind that changes everything. I went to bed that night restless, my mind replaying every second. I told myself it was just wine and loneliness, that nothing would ever happen. But deep down, I knew the boundary had already been cracked, and cracks have a way of spreading when you try to ignore them. By the next morning, I found myself dressing differently, subtly, unconsciously. A softer blouse, a touch of lipstick, perfume I hadn't worn in months. I told myself it was for me, but I knew it wasn't. It was for the man who wasn't mine, the one sleeping just down the hall. I didn't know where it was leading, only that part of me no longer wanted to stop it. The days that followed were filled with small, invisible wars inside me. Every time Ryan spoke, every time he smiled, something in me wavered between guilt and need. I tried to silence the voice that whispered things I didn't want to hear, that I enjoyed his company, that I missed being noticed. It wasn't love, not the kind that writes itself in fairy tales. It was something quieter but more dangerous, a hunger to feel alive again. David was still away, sending the usual short messages, "Hope you're fine. Don't forget the bills." He'd been absent long before his physical absence began. Our marriage had become like an old song, familiar, but no longer stirring. And Ryan, unknowingly or not, had started playing a different melody. One evening, I found him in the living room, half asleep on the couch with a book open on his chest. A soft light fell across his face, and for a brief moment, I saw not my son-in-law but a man, one who looked lost, tired, and maybe just as lonely as I was. I covered him with a blanket, careful not to wake him, but when his hand brushed mine in his sleep, something inside me shifted. The house felt too quiet that night. I walked to my room, closed the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who'd once believed life was simple. She had eyes full of questions and a heart caught between duty and desire. I told myself this was just a phase, that when Lily returned, everything would fall back into place. But the truth was, I didn't want it to. The next morning, breakfast felt different. He smiled as if we shared a secret, though nothing had truly happened yet. Still, silence can sometimes hold more meaning than words. I burned the toast because I couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice softened when he said my name. Later that afternoon, it began to rain. The kind of rain that makes the world seem smaller, like time itself slows down. Ryan offered to help me bring in the laundry from the backyard. We both laughed at how soaked we got, but laughter gave way to a moment of stillness, that pause when everything else fades and two people realize what they've been avoiding. He looked at me then, not with disrespect, not even with certainty, but with confusion, the same kind that lived inside me. His voice was quiet when he said, "You don't have to be so strong all the time." I wanted to respond, to say something that made sense, but all I could do was look away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed his words over and over. It wasn't about crossing a line anymore, it was about realizing how close we already were to it. I knew I should have pulled back, set a wall, reminded him who I was, but I didn't. Because deep down, being seen, being felt, even for a fleeting moment, was something I hadn't had in years. And though nothing physical had yet happened between us, something far more intimate already had. A silent confession written in glances, in shared quiet, in the fragile understanding that what we were doing was wrong, yet impossible to completely stop. When I finally drifted to sleep, I knew the next day would test us both, and that pretending nothing had changed would no longer be possible. The next few days blurred together like rain against glass, nothing sharp, yet every drop leaving a trace. Ryan and I went about our routines carefully, as if both of us were walking on invisible glass. We didn't talk about what was building between us, but silence has a way of speaking louder than words. I tried to distract myself with chores, sweeping, cooking, pretending the world was normal. But each ordinary thing, his voice calling my name from another room, the scent of his soap in the hallway, tugged at me like a secret waiting to be told. I caught myself wondering how we had reached this point, and whether it was too late to turn around. That Friday evening, David called. His voice was distant, full of business talk and travel fatigue. He didn't ask how I was, only if the electricity bill had been paid. When the call ended, I sat in the kitchen staring at nothing. I realized then how long it had been since anyone had truly looked at me. Ryan walked in quietly, saw the phone still in my hand, and asked, "You okay?" His tone was careful, gentle, almost protective. I nodded, but my voice betrayed me when I whispered, "I don't even know anymore." He sat across from me, not saying a word. For a while, the only sound was the rain tapping against the window. Then he said softly, "You deserve to feel like you matter." It was such a simple sentence, but it shattered something inside me. I'd spent years trying to convince myself that contentment was enough, that comfort could replace connection. But in that moment, I realized how starved I'd become for sincerity. He reached across the table, and his hand brushed mine. It wasn't a bold gesture, but it was full of meaning. A quiet promise and a dangerous comfort all at once. The air grew heavy, my heart pounded, not from excitement, but from the weight of choice. I knew that if I didn't stop this now, there would be no going back. Yet, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I didn't move my hand away. Instead, I looked at him and saw a reflection of everything I'd buried: youth, hope, tenderness. It wasn't about romance, it was about rediscovery. About realizing that parts of me still existed beneath the years of routine and duty. Later that night, after we'd both gone to our separate rooms, I stood in front of my mirror again. The same woman looked back, but this time, her eyes carried both fear and defiance. I wasn't proud of what was happening, but neither could I deny the truth of it. Something had already changed between us, and pretending otherwise felt like lying to myself. That was the night I understood what people mean when they say a boundary doesn't always break with noise. Sometimes, it's quiet, a moment so small it feels harmless until you realize everything inside you has shifted. I lay in bed for hours, listening to the soft creaks of the house, wondering if he was awake too, thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same impossible pull. I knew that whatever came next would mark us both. And even though I didn't know how far it would go, I sensed that life as I knew it would never return to the way it was. After that night, the air in the house changed. It wasn't loud or obvious, just different. We both carried a quiet awareness of what had passed between us, though no one else would have noticed a thing. I began to avoid long eye contact. Not because I didn't want to look at him, but because I was afraid of what my eyes might reveal. Ryan, on his part, acted normal, but sometimes his voice would soften when he spoke to me, and it made my heart ache. There was a tenderness there that didn't belong, a kind that shouldn't exist between us. When I looked at him now, I didn't just see my daughter's husband. I saw a man who had stumbled into the same emptiness I'd been living with for years. And that was what made it so hard. I understood him. We were two lonely people who had found comfort in the wrong place. Days passed quietly. I kept myself busy with chores, cooking, and phone calls with friends to fill the silence. But the guilt followed me like a shadow. Every time Lily called from abroad, my throat tightened. She sounded happy, confident, full of plans for the future. And there I was, her mother, hiding a secret I couldn't even put into words. Sometimes I caught Ryan watching me, not with longing, but with regret. We both knew what we'd done wasn't right, even if it hadn't gone as far as it could have. It was the intent, the emotional closeness, that felt like betrayal. I could sense him wrestling with it too. One afternoon, while folding laundry, he came to me quietly. "We should talk," he said. His tone was gentle, but firm. My hands trembled as I placed a shirt on the pile. He went on, "I don't want to hurt anyone. Least of all Lily. I think we crossed a line, maybe not one people can see, but one we both feel." I nodded, unable to speak. He was right. There was no undoing the moments we'd shared, but there was still time to stop it from going further. That evening, I sat outside on the porch again, watching the sky turn gold and then gray. The world around me looked so peaceful, and yet my heart felt heavy. I thought of David, of all the quiet years between us, of how easy it had been to drift apart without realizing it. I thought of Lily, of the life she was building, and how she trusted me completely. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I even noticed. It wasn't just guilt, it was loss. Loss of innocence, of clarity, of the person I thought I was. Ryan came outside, stood beside me, and said softly, "Maybe the best thing we can do is forget." His voice cracked slightly. "Some things are better left as lessons than mistakes." I didn't respond, but I knew he was right. We sat there for a while in silence, two people trying to breathe under the weight of what couldn't be undone. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I didn't write details, just feelings. I wrote about loneliness, about finding warmth where I shouldn't, about realizing that some boundaries aren't meant to be tested because once they are, you lose a piece of yourself no one can ever return. By the time I closed my notebook, I felt a small kind of peace. Not the peace of forgiveness, but the peace of acceptance, that I couldn't change the past, but I could choose what came next. Time has a strange way of healing and haunting at the same time. Months passed after that quiet evening on the porch, but the memory of everything that happened between Ryan and me still lingered like a faint perfume, one you think has faded until you catch it again in the air. Lily came back home not long after. She was radiant, full of stories about her trip, her studies, and her plans with Ryan. Watching them together was both comforting and painful. There was real affection between them, the kind of youthful spark I remembered having once, before life became about schedules, bills, and endurance. Ryan acted as if nothing had ever happened, and in a way, that was his strength. He knew how to bury things neatly, how to hide turmoil behind a calm face. I envied him for that. For me, the memory lived on quietly. Not in guilt alone, but in the reminder of what it means to be human, flawed, vulnerable, and capable of crossing lines even when we know better. I didn't hate myself, but I didn't forgive myself either. I simply learned to live in the middle of those two emotions. It became a private balance, one that allowed me to smile again, to function, to love my family without falling apart. Sometimes, I catch Ryan glancing at me across the room during family dinners, just a brief acknowledgement of shared history. There's no desire in it now, only understanding. A silent promise that the past will stay buried, where it belongs. David never suspected anything. Our marriage continued much as it always had, safe, predictable, restrained. But I began to see him differently. I started making small efforts to bridge the distance between us. A touch on the shoulder here, a longer conversation there. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was gratitude, for still having something left to repair. Ryan and Lily eventually moved to another city. The day they left, I hugged Lily tight, holding her longer than usual. When I hugged Ryan, it was quick and formal. Yet in that brief moment, I felt both closure and sorrow. We had both chosen silence, not because we were proud, but because it was the only way to protect the people we loved. Years later, I sometimes revisit that chapter of my life in my mind. I don't justify it, but I don't deny it either. It reminded me of my fragility, of the danger in loneliness, and of how easily emotional hunger can turn into something irreversible. That's why I decided to share my story, not for sympathy or confession, but as a caution. Affairs don't always start with passion. Sometimes, they begin with neglect, with a quiet need to be seen. And sometimes, they end not with chaos, but with silence, a silence that echoes for years. So yes, I remain anonymous. My husband never knew, my daughter never suspected, and the world never noticed. But I know, and that's enough to keep me humble, careful, and honest, especially with myself. Some secrets don't destroy you. They simply live with you, reshaping the way you see love, loyalty, and loneliness. This one is mine. This story is a fictionalized dramatization inspired by real-life emotional experiences. All characters and names are entirely anonymous and fictional. The purpose of this story is for emotional reflection and awareness, not to promote or justify infidelity in any form. Viewer discretion is advised. This content is intended for mature audiences only. Some stories don't end with exposure or scandal, some end quietly, behind closed doors, where the only witness is your own conscience. When My Son-in-Law Crossed a Boundary is one of those stories, a reminder that betrayal doesn't always begin with physical acts. Sometimes, it starts with neglect, silence, and the slow forgetting of who we are to one another. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or emotionally lost in your own relationship, let this story remind you of one truth: what we don't nurture at home, someone else might notice. It's not an excuse, it's a warning. Love is fragile, attention is powerful, and loneliness can make even the strongest hearts stumble. Thank you for watching and staying with me till the end of this emotional journey. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you how fragile love can be, right finger please like, share, and subscribe to our channel, True Infidelity Stories, for more real, raw, and thought-provoking tales coming every week. Every view, comment, and subscription helps us bring you more stories that speak to the heart, stories about love, betrayal, forgiveness, and the complicated beauty of being human. Speech balloon, drop your thoughts in the comment section. We'd love to hear how this story made you feel. Bell, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional confession. Until next time, stay true, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the loudest lessons come from the quietest mistakes.